Now that you've been introduced to ratios, let's make a connection between ratios and the real world. When making cookies or any baked good, it's important to keep in mind how many people you are baking for and the amount the recipe makes. If your recipe only makes 24 cookies, but you have 72 people to feed, you will have to use ratios to figure out how much of each ingredient you will need in order to make enough cookies without having to mix and measure the ingredients multiple times. For this real-world example, I plan to make cookies. This recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon salt, 1 cup of butter, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon vanilla, 2 eggs, 2 cups of chocolate chips, and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. When baked, this makes 24 cookies in all. Let's set up a ratio comparing one batch to the number of cookies it makes. Our recipe makes 24 cookies. Another way to say this is one batch yields 24 cookies. We can write ratios 3 different ways. One of these ways is using a fraction. One batch makes 24 cookies, so we will write this as 1/24. Another way to write a ratio is using a colon. Remember, we read this as 1/24. The way we read a ratio is also another way to write it, using words. We use 1/24 to represent the number of batches to cookies. Let's set up a ratio table to represent this. For every one batch, we get 24 cookies. Write this in the table first. Let's multiply each of these by 2. 1 times 2 is 2, and 24 times 2 is 48. That means that for every 2 batches made, we get 48 cookies. Now, what if we cut the number of cookies we make in half? We multiply the number of batches and cookies by 1/2. 1 times 1/2 is 1/2, and 24 times 1/2 is 12. So 1/2 of a batch will make 12 cookies. What if we wanted to see how many cookies we would make if we cut the number of cookies we make into 1/4? We would multiply each of the original numbers by 1/4. 1 times 1/4 is equal to 1/4. 24 times 1/4 is the same thing as dividing 24 by 4, which is equal to 6. How many cookies could we make if we multiplied our recipe by 3? For every 3 batches, we could make 72 cookies. Because 1 times 3 is equal to 3, and 24 times 3 is equal to 72. Now, what if I got really hungry and wanted to make 6 batches of cookies? 1 times 6 is 6, and 24 times 6 is equal to 144. That means if I make 6 batches of cookies, I would have 144 cookies in all. Another way to show these ratios is using a double number line. This shows the same information as the table, but in a simpler format. One batch makes 24 cookies. 1/4 of a batch makes 6 cookies. And 6 batches makes 144 cookies. Now, let's use these ratios to solve this problem. I want to bake cookies for my students. In all, I have 72 students. Use your knowledge of ratios to determine how much of each ingredient I will need to make cookies for all of my students. Let's look back at our table. If I want to make 72 cookies, I will need to make 3 batches. If we look above the batches row and below the cookies row, we can see that we multiply the ratio of 1/24 batches to cookies by 3 to get a total of 72 cookies. If we multiply each of these by 3, we will also have to multiply the total amount of each ingredient by 3 to find out how much we will use in the recipe. To determine how much flour I will need to make 72 cookies, I will have to multiply 2 1/4 cups by 3. Remember, to multiply fractions, I have to first convert my mixed number into an improper fraction. So I will take the whole number, 2, times the denominator, 4. This gives me 8. Then I will add 8 to 1 to get 9. So another way to say 2 1/4 is 9/4. To multiply, we will also have to write 3 as a fraction. Another way to say the number 3 is 3/1. When multiplying fractions, multiply your numerators, then multiply your denominators. 9 times 3 is 27, and 4 times 1 is 4. But we can reduce this fraction by dividing 27 by 4. I know that 4 times 6 is 24, so 4 goes into 27 6 times with 3 left over. This is written as 6 3/4. To make 72 cookies, I will need 6 3/4 cups of flour. We need the same amount of baking soda, vanilla, and salt. So let's do this conversion one time rather than 3. We need 1 teaspoon of each, and remember, we are multiplying the amount of each ingredient by 3, because 3 batches make 72 cookies. 1 times 3 is equal to 3. So, to make 72 cookies, I will need 3 teaspoons of baking soda, vanilla, and salt. Now it's your turn. Find out how much of each of the remaining ingredients I will need to make cookies for all of my students.